Hi there, my name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, host of Scrapbook Soup TV. I'm also the author of a book called Carve, Stamp, Play, which is all about stamp carving. Now, whenever I carve, the only marker that I can use to mark my blocks is the Sakura Permapaque. Now, this is a opaque permanent paint marker, which really easily writes on top of a rubber block. I've tried a lot of different other permanent markers and they run dry, the color won't come out. There's some sort of chemical reaction with the rubber, but you can see how easily the Permapaque writes right across that surface. And by marking my stamps, that's how I can easily create these nesting stamps that you see on the layout. So if you're interested in stamp carving, give the Permapaque a try. So let's get started carving some new stamps of our own. Okay, so if you look at the layout that I brought here, I actually have a whole bunch of different hand-carved stamps. You can probably see from the background here, this is the stamp that I used, and I carved that up myself. Just any design that you draw, you can carve, which I think is pretty cool. But did you know that there are also other hand-carved stamps on here? These are all hand-carved stamps that match. And what do I mean by that? Well, let me bring this over right next to the triangle so you can see it. I'm carving the same design two different ways so that you can create these wonderful stamps that fit in each other. So let me show you how easy that is to do. So I'm working on a glass mat and I'm working with some rubber that's meant for stamp carving. And I simply cut apart my blocks to the same size just using a utility knife like this, okay? And once that's cut apart, then I'm going to take a plain piece of paper and using a pencil, and it is actually really important that it's a pencil. It doesn't necessarily have to be a mechanical pencil, but the way that we're going to transfer our design is with a pencil. So I've traced the shape, and now I'm going to draw my incredibly difficult and complicated design, which just looks, I think, you know, like a bunch of little dots, and they're not even perfect circles, they're not all the same size. But this is where the magic is gonna come in. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna cut out my design so that it's just on my piece of paper so that I can make sure that I place it exactly where I want onto my block, okay? So I've cut it out. Now I'm going to take that pencil drawing and I'm going to put it face down on the first block, okay? Then I'm going to rub with my thumb, a great tool that you always have with you. So it's one of my favorites to use. And guess what's going to happen? That's right. The design is going to transfer right to the block. And there is enough lead on here that I can now go ahead and do the same design rubbing on here. And that's how my designs are going to match perfectly. So there's no having to worry about any kind of registration mark or anything like that. But there is my second design. Now here's a little tip. I'm going to take a ballpoint pen. And on the backs, notice I'm not rotating them, I'm just flipping them. I'm going to draw an arrow. And that's because I want to make sure that these are going to line up perfectly. So I want to make sure that I know which way everything's going. Once that's done, I can of course trace these now in a pen just to make sure that I can really see the lines. But if you're clear that you can see the lines, then you do not need to do that. That's an extra step. Now you need to find a permanent marker, and I find a colored permanent marker works really best for me. And it has to be something that's going to draw on top of rubber and be permanent and not come off on your fingers and also not dry out. There's something chemical about the stamp carving rubber that sometimes dries out markers, so test whatever markers you have in your stash at home to see what's going to work for you. So then I'm just going to go ahead and color this in around here. Now, how careful am I being? It's not super careful. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand which part of the rubber I'm going to be carving away. So on the first one, you can see that I'm going to be carving out, okay, the part that's green, which means on the matching one, I'm going to make the opposite part green, which means I'm going to color in these circles right here. So the reason I'm coloring them is not because the coloring is doing anything other than giving me a guideline. And I find, let's say I get interrupted in the middle of doing this project. I have to answer the phone, somebody wants something. I can walk away and I can come back a week, a year, however long later, and I will know exactly what my intentions were, exactly what I wanted to do, okay? And I like to use a color that contrasts, of course, with the pink rubber, and I find that that green does it. So once they're completely colored, they're going to look a little something like this. And again, notice that I have my arrows on the back. That's really important. So now I'm going to go ahead and use my carving tool. So your carving tool will come with a bunch of different blades. I am going to start with the smallest blade. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up my little chuck here. And then I'm going to stick it right in there, just like that, tighten it down, okay? And then it's ready to use. Now you can have one handle and use it over and over again with all your different blades, just trading them out, or you can have multiple handles and put the different blades in them, whichever one feels more comfortable for you. So now when I begin carving, I always think of myself as creating a castle. And what does a castle have around it? It has a moat. So what we're gonna do is I'm going to carve on the outside edge of the green. Now there are a couple important safety things. Notice how my hand is bridged so I don't accidentally cut myself in any way. The other thing is, notice that I am rotating the rubber, and this is the reason for the glass mat. It slides beautifully on a piece of glass in a way that it doesn't on a self-healing mat. So I'm creating the moat, and you can see the tiny, thin, little sliver of rubber that comes away. It's really amazingly small. You are not pushing hard, you are not digging deep. And then what I'm gonna do is I can take my larger blade, now that I created the moat, which is an area of safety, and I can simply carve away the inside here. But again, I'm trying not to keep my fingers anywhere, but switching up to the larger blade allows me to make sure that I'm doing this in the speediest, easiest way possible. And I'm all about the easy. So the next thing I'm gonna do is, once I've carved out all these green spots, guess what I'm gonna do on here? Well, I'm gonna carve away the green, of course. So to do that, I'm gonna create a moat. But this time I'm going again in the green area, right on the outside of that circle, as opposed to last time I was going on the inside of that circle, just like this. And again, it's that very small sliver of rubber. And then I can, of course, once I've created, let's create a second moat so we make sure that everything is protected just like a moat should. Again, rotating the block, not my tool. My tool stays in the exact same position the whole time. Once that's done, I can blade up to a larger size blade, and then I'm simply going to cut away the excess rubber. Anything that's green is going away. And I do like to trim down the edges, okay? So once that is completely carved, you're gonna have something that looks like this. Now the reason this is black instead of green is because I've used it and my ink has stained my stamps, but don't worry, it's plenty dry and it's not coming off on my hands at all. So let's stamp these so that you can see how very cool it is. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab a piece of paper. I'm just using a plain piece of white paper here, but you do not have to stamp on white. You can stamp on any color. And I do like to ink my stamps often down as opposed to up. Now here's another tip. Which of these should you stamp first? Well, it's going to be easier for you to find your image if you actually stamp the outside first. So let's stamp that outside first. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some ink, ink that one up just like this. Now the big thing about hand carved stamps is there's no mount. You can of course add a mount if you'd like, but you don't have to. Notice where the arrow is. This is really important. My arrow is pointing this way. That means when I take my next stamp, which we're going to ink up, I think we already inked it, but let's make sure it's really inked. I'm going to look for the arrow, make sure it's pointing the same way, then I just line up the outside of my stamp with the other one, and boom, just like that, I have a matching one, which I have nice clean color inside. So if I wanted to do like I did on the layout and really have something that has a lot of pattern, what I would do is I would stamp the outside stamp several times in the same direction, just like this, and add it in, okay? Super cool. So as you can see from my finished layout, I finished it off with a couple nice embellishments. Not only the patterns, but I simply took a gold pen and I went ahead and I just colored in and wrote this out, and then I cut it out. You can see how pretty that gold is. And then to match on the outside, I took a larger tip, did a little edging like this, and it just adds that perfect little finish.